He laughed at her cheap shoes and threw $100 bill in her face, calling her a nobody. He didn't know that the phone buzzing in her apron pocket was a direct line to the Oval Office. You're about to witness the most satisfying instant karma in history. This is the story of Arthur Sterling, a billionaire who thought his money made him a god, and Sarah Bennett, the quiet waitress who held a secret powerful enough to bring his empire crashing down. When she answers that call, watch closely, because the color is about to drain from his face forever. The rain in Washington, D.C. has a way of making the city look like a watercolor painting, gray, smeared, and relentlessly busy. But inside Le Ciel, located just 3 blocks from the White House, the weather was irrelevant. Here, the air always smelled of white truffles, aged mahogany, and old money. Le Ciel wasn't just a restaurant, it was an institution. It was the kind of place where senators made handshake deals that shifted borders, and lobbyists spent more on a single bottle of Chateau Margaux than most families spent on a car. Sarah Bennett adjusted her apron in the reflection of the brass espresso machine. At 56, Sarah was invisible to most of the clientele. She had soft grey hair pinned back in a severe bun, sensible orthopedic shoes that made no sound on the plush carpet, and a face that bore the lines of a life lived hard, but with dignity. She wasn't the young, aspiring model type that the front-of-house manager usually hired. She was a fixture, reliable, silent, and efficient. To the patrons, she was just the help, a pair of hands that refilled water glasses and cleared crumbs. "Table 4 is yours tonight, Sarah," the floor manager, Henry, hissed as he breezed past her, clutching a leather-bound reservation book like a Bible. "And God help you, it's Arthur Sterling." Sarah's eyes tightened slightly at the corners. Everyone knew Arthur Sterling. He was the CEO of Sterling Vanguard, a defense contracting firm that had just secured a multi-billion-dollar government tender. He was 38, handsome in a predatory way, and possessed a net worth that allowed him to treat human beings like disposable napkins. "He requested the corner booth," Henri whispered frantically, wiping sweat from his forehead. "He's meeting with the Japanese delegation. Everything must be perfect. If he asks for the moon, you find a ladder. Do you understand?" "I understand, Henri," Sarah said, her voice calm and smoky. "It's just dinner." "It is never just dinner with Sterling," Henry warned. At 7:15 p.m., the heavy oak door swung open. Arthur Sterling entered like he owned the oxygen in the room. He was flanked by 2 associates in Brioni suits and followed by a tall, terrified-looking personal assistant. Sterling wore a navy bespoke suit that cost more than Sarah's annual rent. He didn't wait to be seated. He simply marched toward the best table in the house, talking loudly on his phone. "I don't care what the zoning laws say. Get the permit. I'm Arthur Sterling, for God's sake. Buy the mayor if you have to." He snapped the phone shut and sat down, not even acknowledging Henry, who was bowing slightly. Sarah approached the table with the water pitcher. "Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to Le Ciel." Sterling didn't look up. He was busy inspecting the silverware, running a thumb over the polished fork. He frowned. "There's a spot on this," he said, dropping the fork onto the pristine white tablecloth with a loud clatter. The restaurant, usually a hum of polite conversation, went quiet for a split second. "I apologize, sir," Sarah said softly. She reached out to retrieve the fork. "Don't touch it!" Sterling barked, finally looking at her. His eyes were cold, blue ice. He looked her up and down, his lip curling in distaste. "God, Henri, is this the best you have? I bring the head of the Tokyo negotiation team here, and you serve me with this?" He gestured vaguely at Sarah's age, her sensible shoes, her tired eyes. "I can get another server, Mr. Sterling," Henry stammered, rushing over. "No," Sterling said, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "No, let her stay. It's a good reminder of what happens when you don't aim high in life. Right, gentlemen?" He laughed, looking at his associates, who forced awkward chuckles. Sarah didn't flinch. She had raised 3 children on her own while working 2 jobs. She had buried a husband. She had lived a life of quiet tragedies and immense joys. The insults of a man-child in a suit were nothing new. "I will bring you a fresh setting immediately, sir," she said, her voice steady. "Make sure you do," Sterling sneered, "and try not to infect the spoon with mediocrity on the way back." Sarah walked back to the kitchen, her back straight. Inside her pocket, her old, cracked smartphone vibrated. She ignored it. She knew who it was. It was Tuesday. He always called on Tuesdays if he could get a secure line. But she couldn't answer now. She returned with the polished silverware. As she placed it down, Sterling suddenly moved his arm, knocking the water pitcher she was holding. Ice water splashed onto the edge of his expensive cuff. It was a deliberate move. Sarah knew it. He knew it. Sterling jumped up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. "You clumsy hag," he shouted. The entire restaurant froze. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. "This is a $5,000 suit. Are you blind as well as stupid?" "Sir, you moved your arm," Sarah began, calm but firm. "Don't you dare talk back to me," Sterling hissed, stepping into her personal space. He loomed over her, smelling of expensive scotch and aggression. "Do you know who I am? I could buy this building and turn it into a parking lot just to fire you. Look at you. You're pathetic." Henry was paralyzed with fear. The other diners looked down at their plates, unwilling to intervene and risk the wrath of DC's most aggressive billionaire. "I am sorry about your suit," Sarah said, picking up a napkin to help him. He slapped her hand away. "Don't touch me." He reached into his wallet and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. He crumpled it into a ball and threw it at her. It bounced off her chest and landed on the floor. "There," Sterling said, his voice loud enough for the whole room to hear. "That's probably more than you make in a week. Take it as a severance package. Get out of my face." Sarah looked at the money on the floor. Then she looked at Sterling. For the first time, her eyes flashed with something dangerous. It wasn't anger, it was pity. "I don't want your money, Mr. Sterling," she said quietly. "Pick it up," he commanded. "Pick it up and crawl away." The tension in the room was suffocating. This wasn't just rudeness anymore. It was a public execution of dignity. And then, in the deafening silence, a sound cut through the air. Buzz, buzz, buzz. It was the cheap, jarring ringtone of Sarah's phone. Sterling stared at her apron pocket in disbelief. "Are you joking? You're taking a call while I'm speaking to you?" "I need to answer this," Sarah said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. "If you answer that phone," Sterling seethed, his face turning a shade of crimson, "I will ensure you never work in this city again. I will have you blacklisted from every diner, cafe, and hot dog stand in Washington. Do you hear me?" Sarah reached into her apron. Her hands, usually rough from detergent and work, were steady. She pulled out the phone. The screen was cracked, but the caller ID was visible to her. It simply read, "Unknown number." But Sarah knew the code. "Excuse me," she said to Sterling, turning her back on him. "Don't you turn your back on me," Sterling shouted. He grabbed her shoulder to spin her around. Sarah's reaction was instinctive. In her youth, decades ago, before the waitress uniform and the grey hair, Sarah Bennett had been someone else. She shifted her weight, locking her shoulder and brushing his hand off with a technique that was too precise for a simple waitress. Sterling stumbled back, surprised by her physical rigidity. She pressed the green button and lifted the phone to her ear. "Hello?" she said. The voice on the other end was warm, familiar, and exhausted. "Sarah, is that you? I know I'm calling early, but the briefing ran long and I needed to hear a friendly voice." Sarah's face softened instantly. The mask of the stoic waitress dropped, revealing a deep, maternal warmth. "It's okay, Thomas. You sound tired. Are you eating enough? I saw the press conference yesterday. You looked pale." Sterling was watching her with his mouth open. He looked around the restaurant, gesturing frantically to Henri. "She's insane," Sterling laughed, loud and mocking. "She's having a casual chat while serving Arthur Sterling. Get security. Get her out of here." Sarah held up one finger to Sterling, a gesture of authority that silenced him momentarily. "I'm trying, Sarah," the voice on the phone laughed. "But the mess in the Middle East is keeping me up, and the opposition is blocking the infrastructure bill. Honestly, I'd kill for your pot roast right now. The chefs here are world-class, but they don't know how to season a roast like you do." "You need to sleep, Thomas," Sarah scolded gently. "The country can survive 8 hours without you worrying. How are the kids? How is Martha?" Sterling had had enough. He signaled to his bodyguards. "Grab her," he ordered. "Throw her out the back alley." The 2 men in suits stepped forward. Henri, the manager, was practically hyperventilating. "Sarah, please," Henri squeaked. "Hang up the phone." "Sarah?" The voice on the phone sharpened. "What's that noise? Is someone shouting at you?" Sarah sighed, looking at the 2 hulking security guards approaching her. "It's nothing, Thomas. Just a customer who's having a bad day. He's very upset about a water stain on his cuff." "A customer?" The voice dropped an octave, losing its warmth and gaining the steeliness that half the world feared. "Are you at work? I thought you retired last month like I asked you to. I like to keep busy, you know that," Sarah said. "That's it," Sterling yelled. He snatched the phone from Sarah's hand. "Hey!" Sarah shouted, reaching for it. Sterling held the phone up, sneering into the receiver. "Listen to me, whoever this is. Your girlfriend here is a competent, less incompetent waitress who just ruined a $5,000 suit. She's currently being escorted out of the building. So stop calling her, or I'll find out who you are and buy your mortgage just to foreclose on it." There was a silence on the other end of the line. A silence so heavy it felt like the air pressure in the room dropped. When the voice returned, it wasn't the tired friend Sarah had been speaking to. It was a voice that commanded armies. "Who is this?" the voice demanded. "I am Arthur Sterling," he announced proudly. "CEO of Sterling Vanguard. Now who the hell are you?" "Arthur Sterling," the voice mused. "Sterling Vanguard. You have the pending contract for the Mark IV drone systems, don't you?" Sterling paused. He frowned. "How do you know that? That's classified information until next week." "I know a lot of things, Mr. Sterling." Put Sarah back on the phone. "I don't take orders from nobodies," Sterling spat. "I'm hanging up." "If you hang up that phone," the voice said, calm and terrifyingly clear, "I will have the IRS audit your personal finances back to 1995 by tomorrow morning. I will have the Department of Defense blacklist Sterling Vanguard from every government contract for the next 50 years. And I will have the Secret Service at your table in 3 minutes. Sterling froze. The color drained from his face. He looked at the cheap, cracked phone in his hand. He looked at Sarah, who was standing there with her arms crossed, looking more disappointed than angry. Who is this?" Sterling whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "This is President Thomas Hayes," the voice replied. "And you are holding my phone. Give it back to Sarah. Now." Sterling's hand began to shake. He looked at the phone screen again. There was no name, but the authority in the voice was unmistakable. Everyone knew President Hayes's voice. It was the voice on the news every night. Sterling slowly lowered the phone. He looked at Sarah. His eyes were wide, filled with a sudden, dawning horror. It says, Sterling stammered, holding the phone out to her like it was a live grenade. Sarah took the phone from his trembling hand. She put it back to her ear. "I'm here, Thomas. I'm sorry about that. He's a very rude young man." "Rude?" The president's voice was loud enough that even Henri could hear it from 3 feet away. "He threatened you, Sarah. Did he touch you?" "He pushed me a little," Sarah admitted, "and he threw money at me." "Stay there," the president said. "I'm in the motorcade. We were heading to the Kennedy Center, but we're diverting. I'll be there in 5 minutes. Do not let him leave." The line went dead. Sarah put the phone back in her pocket. She looked at Arthur Sterling. The billionaire was currently gripping the edge of the table, his knuckles white. The silence in the restaurant was absolute. "Was that?" Henry whispered, his face pale as a sheet. "Sarah, was that?" "The president," Sarah said calmly, picking up the crumpled $100 bill from the floor. She smoothed it out and placed it gently on the table in front of Sterling. "Yes. He's on his way." Sterling swallowed hard. You're lying. It's a prank. It's a soundboard." He was trying to convince himself, but the sweat beading on his upper lip told a different story. "Mr. Sterling," Sarah said, her voice dropping to a whisper that only he could hear. "Thomas Hayes wasn't always the president. 40 years ago, he was just a scared boy in the foster care system. A boy who had no one. A boy who cried himself to sleep because he missed his mother." She leaned in closer. "I was the one who dried those tears. I was his foster mother for 12 years. I taught him how to tie his tie. I taught him how to pray. And I taught him that the measure of a man is not the size of his wallet, but how he treats those who can do nothing for him." She straightened up and looked down at him. "You just failed that test, Arthur. And now the teacher is coming." Suddenly, the front windows of Le Ciel were washed in flashing red and blue lights. Sirens wailed, getting louder and louder, until they stopped right outside the front door. Doors slammed. Heavy boots hit the pavement. The heavy oak doors of the restaurant burst open. But this time, it wasn't a billionaire walking in. 4 men in dark suits with earpieces entered, scanning the room with professional intensity. Secret Service. Henry fainted. Arthur Sterling slumped into his chair, looking like a man who wished he could turn into the tablecloth. Sarah simply smoothed her apron and waited. The entry of a sitting president into a public space is not like a celebrity walking into a room. It is a shift in the atmosphere itself. The air pressure seems to change. The ambient noise of clinking cutlery and low chatter didn't just fade. It was severed. The 4 Secret Service agents who had burst through the doors moved with the fluidity of oil. 1 secured the kitchen entrance. 2 flanked the main dining floor. The 4th, a man with a buzz cut and eyes that scanned everything as a potential threat, moved directly to table 4. "Hands on the table, palms open," the agent commanded, his voice low and devoid of emotion. He was looking at Arthur Sterling's bodyguards. The bodyguards, who minutes ago looked like immovable mountains, instantly complied. They knew the hierarchy of predators. In the jungle of DC, they were wolves, but the Secret Service were the apex hunters. Arthur Sterling was frozen. His hand was still hovering near his water-glass. He looked at the agent, then at Sarah. There must be a misunderstanding," he squeaked. Then President Thomas Hayes walked in. He looked exactly like he did on television, perhaps even taller. He wore a charcoal suit, an American flag pin on his lapel, and he carried a tiredness in his shoulders that spoke of the weight of the free world. But his eyes were sharp. They swept the room, ignoring the awe-struck diners, ignoring Henri, who was currently being fanned by a busboy, and locked onto Sarah. "Sarah," he breathed. The President of the United States ignored protocol. He walked past the stunned hostess stand, past the table where the Japanese delegation sat with their mouths slightly open, and went straight to the Waitress station. Sarah Bennett, the woman Arthur Sterling had called a clumsy hag, smiled. It was the smile of a woman seeing her son come home from school. "You look thin, Thomas," she said, her voice cutting through the silence. "Are the White House cooks starving you?" President Hayes laughed, a genuine, boyish laugh that transformed his face. He wrapped his arms around the waitress, hugging her tightly. It wasn't a politician's hug meant for cameras. It was a desperate embrace of a man seeking sanctuary. "I missed you, Ma," he whispered. The word Ma echoed in the silent restaurant. Arthur Sterling felt like he was hallucinating. The president called her Ma. The math didn't add up. Sterling's brain was misfiring, trying to calculate the net worth of the woman he had just humiliated. Hayes pulled back, holding Sarah by the shoulders. He looked at her uniform, then at her face. His expression hardened. "You said he pushed you." Sarah waved a hand dismissively. "It was nothing, Thomas. He was just angry about his suit." Hayes turned. The warmth evaporated from his face instantly. He was no longer the foster son. He was the commander-in-chief. He slowly pivoted toward the corner booth. Arthur Sterling scrambled to stand up. His legs hit the table, rattling the silverware. "Mr. President, what an honor. I'm Arthur Sterling. We met at the donor gala last year. I'm sure you recall." "Sit down," Hayes said. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. The command hit Sterling like a physical blow. Sterling sat. Hayes walked over to the table. He didn't sit. He stood over Sterling, utilizing every inch of his height to loom over the billionaire. He looked at the spilled water. He looked at the crumpled $100 bill that Sarah had smoothed out and placed on the table. "Arthur Sterling," Hayes said, tasting the name like it was spoiled milk. "Sterling Vanguard, you're the one lobbying for the deregulation of drone airspace." Yes, sir." Sterling seized on the topic, thinking he found a lifeline. "It's crucial for national security. My company is ready to lead the way. In fact, I'm here with the Japanese delegation." Sterling gestured to the men across the table, who were currently staring at their shoes, desperately trying to become invisible. "Discussing a partnership that would bring billions to the U.S. economy." Hayes picked up the $100 bill. He held it up to the light. "You threw this at her?" Hayes asked. Sterling's smile faltered. "It was a gratuity, a misunderstanding. The service was, well, accidents happen. I was just trying to compensate her for her trouble." "Compensate her?" Hayes repeated. "You told her to crawl." Sterling went pale. I don't recall using that specific word." "My agent was outside the door," Hayes lied smoothly. "He heard everything. And Sarah never lies. If she says you told her to crawl, then you told her to crawl." Hayes leaned down, placing both hands on the table. "Let me explain something to you, Arthur. That woman you just treated like garbage? When I was 12 years old, I had a fever of 104. The system had given up on me. My own parents were gone. I was angry, violent, and headed for prison. Sarah sat by my bed for 3 days straight. She cooled my forehead with washcloths. She read to me. She saved my life. Not with money. With decency." Hayes looked at the Japanese delegation. He switched seamlessly to fluent Japanese. "Gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption. However, I must inform you that the United States government is currently reviewing the ethical standards of its defense partners. I would advise caution in signing any binding agreements tonight." The head of the Japanese delegation, Mr. Tanaka, stood up and bowed deeply to the president. "We understand perfectly, Mr. President. We value honor above all else. It seems we were misinformed about Mr. Sterling's character." Tanaka turned to Sterling, his face cold. "Mr. Sterling, I believe we will postpone our negotiations indefinitely." "Wait!" Sterling panicked, reaching out. "Mr. Tanaka, please! This is personal. It has nothing to do with business." "Everything is personal, Arthur," Hayes said, switching back to English. "That's the part guys like you never get. You think money insulates you from humanity. You think because you have a 10-figure portfolio, you can treat people like NPCs in a video game." Hayes signaled to the Secret Service agent, Agent Miller. "Miller, what's the status of the Sterling Vanguard security clearance renewal?" Agent Miller stepped forward, tapping his earpiece. "It's currently on the desk of the Secretary of Defense for final signature tomorrow morning, sir." Hayes nodded. He pulled out his own phone, a secure, heavy-duty device. "Get the secretary on the line. Wake him up." Sterling's eyes bulged. No, please. Mr. President, you can't. That contract is my company's entire future. We've leveraged everything on it. If you pull that clearance, stock will plummet. I'll be ruined." "You should have thought about that before you threw money at my mother," Hayes said coldly. The restaurant was a theater, and Arthur Sterling was the tragic villain in the final act. He looked around the room for support, but found none. The diners were filming on their phones. Henry was hiding in the kitchen. His own bodyguards were standing down, unwilling to interfere with federal agents. "Please," Sterling whispered, his arrogance completely stripped away. "I'm sorry. I'll apologize. Sarah, Mrs. Bennett, I am so sorry." He turned to Sarah, clasping his hands together. "I was stressed. It's no excuse. Please tell him. Tell him I apologized." Sarah stood by the president's side. She looked at this man, this master of the universe who was now begging like a child. "It's easy to apologize when you're afraid, Mr. Sterling," Sarah said softly. "The trick is to be kind when you have all the power." Hayes held the phone to his ear. "Mr. Secretary?" "Yes, it's the President. I'm calling about the Sterling Vanguard file. Yes, there's been a change. I have reason to believe the leadership lacks the stability required for top-level clearance. Put a hold on it. Indefinite review. Thank you." Hayes hung up. The sound of the call ending was like a gunshot. "You destroyed me," Sterling whispered, sinking back into the booth. "Over a water stain. You just wiped out $4 billion of value over a water stain." "No," Hayes corrected him. "I didn't do it. You did. You see, Arthur, character is destiny. You built a house of cards on the idea that you were untouchable. All I did was open a window." Hayes turned to the room. He raised his voice slightly, addressing the diners who were watching in rapt attention. "I want to apologize to everyone for ruining your dinner. Please finish your meals. The check for every table in this restaurant is on me tonight." A ripple of applause broke out. It started slow, then grew. People stood up. They weren't clapping for the free food. They were clapping for the justice. It was a visceral, satisfying release of tension. Hayes turned back to Sarah. "Ma, take off that apron. You're done here." "I can't just leave, Thomas," Sarah said, fussing with the pocket. "I have a shift. Henri needs me." "Henri!" Hayes shouted without looking. Henri poked his head out of the kitchen doors, trembling. Yes, Mr. President. I'm taking your best waitress. She's retiring. Tonight. Is that a problem?" "No. No problem at all, sir. An honor. Happy retirement, Sarah." Henry squeaked. Sarah sighed, shaking her head. You always were dramatic, Thomas. She untied the apron. Beneath it, her simple black dress was worn but elegant. She folded the apron neatly and placed it on the table, right next to the $100 bill Sterling had thrown. Keep the money, Mr. Sterling, Sarah said. You're going to need it more than I do. Hayes took Sarah's arm. Come on, the beast is waiting outside. Martha is dying to see you. She made that blueberry pie you taught her, but she swears the crust isn't right. She overworks the dough, Sarah said, falling into step with the president. I've told her 1,000 times, you have to be gentle with it. They began to walk out. The Secret Service formed a protective diamond around them. As they reached the door, Sarah stopped. She turned back one last time to look at Arthur Sterling. He was sitting alone in the corner. The Japanese delegation had already left. His bodyguards were checking their phones, probably looking for new jobs. He looked small. He looked like just another man in a suit, wondering where it all went wrong. Mr. Sterling, Sarah called out. He looked up, his eyes red. My shoes, she said, pointing to her orthopedic footwear. They aren't pretty, but they support me. They help me stand up all day so I can serve others. Maybe you should try walking in a pair sometime. It might help your perspective. With that, she walked out into the cool DC night. The motorcade was waiting. The flashing lights illuminated the wet pavement. Back inside, the silence returned to Le Ciel. But the energy was different. The fear was gone. Arthur Sterling stared at the empty chair opposite him. He reached for his glass of scotch, his hand shaking uncontrollably. He took a sip, but it tasted like ash. He signaled for the manager. Henry approached cautiously. Check, please, Sterling whispered. The president covered the house, sir, Henry said with a hint of satisfaction. But for you, I think we can make an exception. You can pay. Sterling looked at Henry. The fear in the manager's eyes was gone, replaced by a steely resolve. And Mr. Sterling, Henry added, we're fully booked for the foreseeable future. I don't think we'll have a table for you again. Sterling stood up. He left the $100 bill on the table. He walked to the door, his $5,000 suit feeling heavy and suffocating. As he stepped onto the street, he saw the tail lights of the presidential limousine fading into the distance. He reached for his phone to call his PR team, to call his lawyers, to call anyone who could fix this. But as he looked at his contact list, he realized something terrifying. The number of people who would answer his call now, people who liked Arthur Sterling the man, not Arthur Sterling the billionaire, was zero. He had never felt poorer in his life. The next morning, the sun rose over Washington, D.C., just as it always did. But the landscape of power had shifted. The video hit YouTube at 6 a.m. A diner at Table 7, a young tech entrepreneur named Jessica, had filmed the entire interaction. She uploaded it with the title, Billionaire versus the President's Mum, Instant Karma. By 8 a.m., it had 2 million views. By 10 a.m., it was trending worldwide. As Sarah's shoes was the #1 hashtag on Twitter, Arthur Sterling woke up in his penthouse to the sound of his phone ringing. It wasn't the president this time. It was his board of directors. Arthur, the chairman of the board said, his voice icy. Have you seen the news? I can explain, Arthur croaked. He hadn't slept. He was still wearing the trousers from the night before. There is nothing to explain. The stock is down 14% in pre-market trading. The Japanese deal is dead. The Defense Secretary has publicly announced a review of all our contracts, citing ethical alignment concerns. You have become a liability, Arthur. I built this company, Arthur screamed at the wall. You can't do this to me. We can. And we have. The board voted emergency measures an hour ago. You are relieved of your duties as CEO, effective immediately. Security is on their way up to your office to collect your badge. Do not go to the building." The line went dead. Arthur dropped the phone. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city. Usually, this view made him feel like a god. Today, the people down there looked like ants, but he knew they were the ones who had toppled him. Meanwhile, at the White House, the scene was very different. Sarah Bennett sat at the breakfast table in the private residence. She was wearing a silk robe that belonged to the First Lady, Martha Hayes. The table was laden with pancakes, fruit, and coffee. Martha, a woman of grace and intelligence who usually intimidated foreign dignitaries, was currently anxiously watching Sarah take a bite of pie. "Well?" Martha asked. "Be honest, Sarah. Is the crust tough?" Sarah chewed slowly, her face unreadable. Then she winked. "It's perfect, Martha. You finally listened to me." The president walked in, looking fresher than he had in months. He kissed Martha on the cheek and poured himself a coffee. "How does it feel to be the most famous woman in America, Ma?" he asked, tossing a newspaper onto the table. The headline read, "The Waitress Who Served Justice." Sarah pushed the paper away. "I don't want fame, Thomas. I just want people to be decent." "Well, you sparked something," Hayes said. "My press secretary tells me that donations to foster care programs have spiked 300% since last night. People are sharing stories about the Sarahs in their lives, the people who helped them when they were nothing." Sarah smiled, looking down at her coffee. "That's good. That's very good." "There is one thing, though," Hayes said, his expression turning serious. "Sterling isn't going to go quietly. Men like him, when they lose everything, they get desperate. I have a report from the FBI. He's been making calls to some very unsavory fixers." Sarah looked up. "He's going to try to hurt you?" "No," Hayes shook his head. "He knows he can't touch me. He's going to try to dig up dirt on you. He wants to prove that Saint Sarah isn't real. He wants to find a skeleton in your closet to discredit the narrative." Sarah went still. She placed her coffee cup down. "He won't find anything, will he, Ma?" Hayes asked gently. "I know everything about your life, don't I?" Sarah looked out the window at the rose garden. A shadow passed over her face, a fleeting look of ancient pain. "Everyone has a past, Thomas," she said quietly. "Even me." Hayes frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means," Sarah said, standing up, "that Arthur Sterling is about to make the biggest mistake of his life. Again." Arthur Sterling wasn't done. He was a cornered animal, and cornered animals don't surrender. They bite. Exiled from his own company, his credit cards frozen by the bank pending investigation, Sterling was currently operating out of a secondary apartment he kept in Georgetown under a shell company's name. It was luxurious, but to him it felt like a prison cell. Sitting across from him was a man who looked like he was made of cigarette smoke and cheap leather. His name was Silas Vance. He was a fixer, the kind of private investigator you hired when you didn't want the truth. You wanted ammunition. "Tell me you found something," Sterling snapped, pouring himself a drink. "I'm paying you $50,000. I need dirt. I need scandal. I need something that turns Mother Teresa into a monster." Vance tossed a manila folder onto the glass coffee table. It landed with a heavy thud. "You're going to like this," Vance rasped. "Sarah Bennett isn't just a waitress, she's a felon." Sterling froze. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. He snatched up the folder and ripped it open. Inside was a photocopy of an old, grainy police report from 1988. Subject: Sarah Bennett, née O'Malley. Charge: aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. Attempted manslaughter. Status: convicted. served 3 years at Donovan State Penitentiary. She went to prison. Sterling laughed, a sound that bordered on manic. The president's foster mother is a violent ex-con. It gets better, Vance said, lighting a cigarette despite Sterling's glare. Look at who she attacked, a prominent local businessman, a pillar of the community named Richard Gelson. She nearly beat him to death with a tire iron in a parking lot. Sterling read the report voraciously. Unprovoked attack. Victim hospitalized for 3 months. Severe trauma. This is gold, Sterling whispered. This is nuclear. The president is harboring a violent criminal in the White House. He's calling a woman who tried to kill a businessman Ma. Oh, this destroys the narrative. This destroys him. There is a catch, Vance warned. I don't care about catches. Sterling stood up, pacing the room. I have the document. It's public record, but buried deep. You did good, Vance. The catch, Vance continued, ignoring him, is that the court records are sealed regarding the motive. The judge put a gag order on the details. All we have is the conviction. That's even better, Sterling crowed. We don't need the motive. The mystery makes it worse. We just drop the bomb. Attempted murder. Let the public imagination do the rest. They'll think she's a gang member, a psycho, a thug. Sterling grabbed his phone. He dialed the number for the Patriots Hour, a fringe but massive internet talk show hosted by Barry Brockman, a man who thrived on conspiracy theories and destroying liberal politicians. Barry? Sterling said when the host picked up. It's Arthur. Clear your schedule for tonight. I have an exclusive, and I promise you, by tomorrow morning, President Hayes will be facing impeachment hearings. The interview was hyped as the truth they don't want you to know. By 8:00 p.m., 5 million people were watching the live stream. Arthur Sterling sat in the studio, wearing a modest suit, looking somber and reformed. He looked directly into the camera. I acted poorly at the restaurant, Sterling admitted, his voice practiced and smooth. I was under stress. I apologized. But the President of the United States used his power to destroy my life over a spilled water glass. Why? To protect a woman he calls a saint. He paused for dramatic effect. But America deserves to know who this saint really is. Sterling held up the police report. Sarah Bennett is a convicted felon. In 1988, she was sentenced to 3 years in a maximum security prison for the brutal attempted murder of an innocent man. She beat him within an inch of his life with a tire iron. The internet exploded. The live chat on the side of the video moved so fast it was a blur. What? No way. The president's mom is a hitter? Fake news? Shows the document. Sterling held the document up to the camera lens. Read it yourselves. Aggravated assault. Attempted manslaughter. This is the woman sleeping in the Lincoln bedroom tonight. A woman capable of lethal violence. Is this who we want influencing our president? In the White House residence, the mood was funereal. President Hayes was pacing the Oval Office, his face purple with rage. Get the Attorney General. I want that broadcast shut down. I want Sterling arrested for something. Slander. Thomas, stop, Sarah said. She was sitting on the couch, watching the TV screen where Sterling was currently describing her as a deranged lunatic. She looked incredibly tired. The glamour of the last 24 hours had vanished, leaving her looking every minute of her 56 years. He's right, Sarah said softly. The room went silent. Martha Hayes looked at her mother-in-law. Sarah, what do you mean he's right? I did it, Sarah said. She didn't look away from the screen. I beat Richard Gelson with a tire iron. I hit him until he stopped moving, and I went to prison for it. That's why I couldn't foster you officially until you were older, Thomas. I was on parole. Hayes stopped pacing. He knelt in front of her. Ma, I know you. You don't hurt people. Not without a reason. Why didn't you ever tell me? Because you were a boy, Sarah said, touching his cheek, and you needed to believe the world was safe. If I told you what that man was doing, you would have lost that hope. On the TV, the host, Barry Brockman, was foaming at the mouth. There you have it, folks, a violent thug, and we have the victim on the line. We managed to track down Mr. Richard Gelson's family. His son, Mark Gelson, is on the phone now. Sterling grinned. This was the nail in the coffin. Mark? The host shouted. Are you there? Tell us, what did this woman do to your father? There was a crackle of static, and then a voice filled the studio. It was a male voice, shaking with emotion. She didn't do enough, the voice said. Sterling's smile faltered. Excuse me? Mr. Gelson, we're talking about Sarah Bennett, the woman who attacked your father. I know who she is, Mark Gelson said, and I know what my father was. The host looked confused. Sir, your father was a respected businessman. My father was a monster, Mark screamed. The audio peaked, distorting the sound. Everyone in town knew it. But he was rich, so the police looked the other way. He liked children. He liked hurting them. Sterling's face went grey. The studio went deadly silent. In 1988, Mark continued, his voice sobbing now. I was 6 years old. My father dragged me out to the parking lot behind the hardware store. He was going to... Mark took a jagged breath. Sarah Bennett was just walking by. She was a waitress at the diner across the street. She heard me screaming. She didn't run away. She didn't call the police and wait. She grabbed a tire iron from her trunk, and she came at him like a destroying angel. Sarah, watching in the White House, closed her eyes as tears streamed down her face. She stood between me and him, Mark said. He was twice her size. He broke her arm. He broke her ribs. But she didn't stop swinging that iron until he was on the ground. She took 3 years in prison to protect me. She never told the court why she did it, because my mother begged her not to. My mother was afraid of the scandal, so Sarah took the fall. She pled guilty to save my family from the shame. On the screen, Arthur Sterling was trying to signal the producer to cut the line. He was making a cut it motion across his throat, his eyes wide with panic. But the producer didn't cut it. This was the best television in history. I've been looking for her for 30 years, Mark Gelson said, his voice clearing up, finding strength. I became a prosecutor because of her. I put bad men in jail because she showed me that justice is something you fight for. Mr. Sterling, if you think Sarah Bennett is a criminal, then you don't know what a hero looks like. She didn't just save my life. She saved my soul. The feed went silent for a second. Then, Barry Brockman, the host who usually lived for the scandal, looked at Arthur Sterling. He looked at the papers on his desk. Get out, Brockman said. Sterling blinked. What? Get out of my studio, Brockman said, his voice low and dangerous. You didn't vet this? You brought me a woman who saved a kid from a pedophile and tried to paint her as a villain? I didn't know, Sterling stammered. The file just said assault. You didn't know because you didn't care, Brockman shouted. Get him out of here. Cut the feed. The screen went black. In the Oval Office, President Hayes was crying. He wasn't trying to hide it. He sat on the floor, his head resting on Sarah's knees, just like he had when he was 12 years old and sick with fever. You saved him too, Hayes whispered. He was just a baby, Sarah said, stroking the president's hair. He was just a scared little boy. I couldn't walk away. Martha Hayes wiped her eyes and stood up. She walked to the desk and picked up the phone. Get the press secretary, she ordered. and tell the kitchen to prepare the East Room. Sarah has a statement to make, and I want every camera in the world to see her." The studio of the Patriots Hour was designed to look like a bunker, dark metal, flashing red lights, and an American flag backdrop that screamed aggression. Barry Brockman, a host who made his fortune by shredding political careers, leaned into his microphone with a shark-like grin. "We have him, folks," Brockman growled to the 5 million viewers watching the live stream. "Arthur Sterling is here, and he claims the President of the United States is protecting a violent criminal in the White House. Arthur, the floor is yours." Arthur Sterling sat up straighter, smoothing his tie. He felt the rush of power returning. This was his arena now. No Secret Service agents, just the raw volatility of the internet. "I didn't want to do this," Sterling lied, his voice dripping with faux concern. "But the American people deserve the truth. The woman President Hayes calls Ma, Sarah Bennett, is a convicted felon. In 1988, she was sentenced to 3 years in Donovan State Penitentiary for aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. She beat a local businessman named Richard Gelson nearly to death with a tire iron." Sterling held the grainy police report up to the camera. "Attempted manslaughter. This is the woman tucking the president in at night. A thug. A monster." The live chat scrolling on the screen turned into a blur of outrage. Thug Waitress began trending instantly. In the yellow oval room of the White House, the air was sucked out of the room. President Thomas Hayes stood frozen, his eyes locked on the screen. His face was a mask of fury. "I'll kill him," Hayes whispered, his voice shaking. "I will have him buried under so many lawsuits he'll never see the sun." "Thomas, stop," Sarah said. She was sitting on the sofa, her hands folded in her lap. She looked small, tired, and utterly defeated. "It's true," she said softly. Hayes spun around. Martha Hayes gasped. "Sarah, you attacked a man?" "I beat him until he stopped moving," Sarah said, her voice hollow. "I broke his ribs. I broke his arm. I didn't stop until the sirens came. I pled guilty. I went to prison. That's why I could never adopt you, Thomas. The state wouldn't give a child to a violent felon." Hayes looked at the woman who had taught him how to pray, the woman who had healed his childhood trauma. He couldn't reconcile the images. "Why, Ma? You don't hurt people. You save them. Why?" On the screen, Barry Brockman was practically vibrating with excitement. "And folks, we have the final nail in the coffin. We tracked down the victim's family. We have Richard Gelson's son, Mark Gelson, on the line right now." Sterling smirked at the camera. This was it, the victory lap. "Mark!" Brockman shouted. "You're live. Tell us, what kind of animal is Sarah Bennett?" There was a crackle of static over the studio speakers. Then a man's voice broke through. It was trembling, thick with emotion. "She isn't an animal," Mark Gelson said. "She is an angel." Sterling's smirk vanished. He leaned toward the mic. "Mr. Gelson, I think the connection is bad. We're talking about the woman who attacked your father." "I know who she is," Mark shouted, his voice cracking. "And I know who my father was. My father was a predator, a monster. Everyone in town was afraid of him because he was rich. But Sarah, she wasn't afraid." The studio went deathly silent. Brockman looked confused. "Sir, clarify your statement." "In 1988, I was 6 years old," Mark sobbed. "My father dragged me behind the hardware store. He was hurting me. Sarah was just a waitress at the diner across the street. She heard me screaming. She didn't call for help. She didn't wait. She grabbed a tire iron from her trunk and she charged him." In the White House, Hayes dropped to his knees in front of Sarah. Tears were streaming down his face. Sarah closed her eyes, letting the memory wash over her. She stood between us, Mark continued. He was twice her size. He beat her. He broke her nose. But she kept getting up. She swung that iron to keep him away from me. She saved my life that day. She went to prison because my mother begged her not to tell the court the truth. She wanted to protect the family reputation. So Sarah took the silence. She took the years. She took the shame. To protect me. Sterling was frantic now. He was waving his hands at the producer, making a slashing motion across his throat. "Cut the feed! He's lying! Cut it!" But Barry Brockman wasn't cutting anything. The host, usually a merchant of hate, looked at Sterling with genuine disgust. He looked at the police report on his desk, then at the billionaire sweating in the chair. "You didn't know?" Brockman asked quietly. I just had the conviction record," Sterling stammered. "The motive was sealed. You tried to destroy a woman who took a beating to save a child." Brockman stood up. "Get out." "What?" "Get out of my studio," Brockman roared, pointing at the door. "Get this piece of trash out of here, and keep Mark on the line. I want to hear the rest." As security guards grabbed Arthur Sterling by the arms to drag him off set, the camera zoomed in on his terrified face. It was the face of a man who realized he hadn't just lost his money. He had lost his humanity in front of the entire world. The screen went black. In the quiet of the White House, Thomas Hayes rested his forehead against Sarah's hands. "You saved him too," Hayes whispered. "He was just a baby, Thomas," Sarah said, stroking the president's hair, her touch as gentle as ever. "I couldn't walk away. I just couldn't." And that is the story of how a billionaire's arrogance became his downfall, and how a quiet waitress proved that true power isn't about money, it's about character. Arthur Sterling thought he could crush Sarah Bennett, but he only revealed the diamond underneath the pressure. If you enjoyed this story of instant karma and justice, please hit the like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story. What would you have done if you were in Sarah's shoes? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and remember, be kind, because you never know who you're talking to.